Samuel Brooks went out shopping one day and never came back. 14 years later, his family finally learns the shocking truth behind his disappearance. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through partially drawn curtains in the Turner family's living room, drawing long shadows over the hardwood floor. Samuel, now 50 years old and confined to a wheelchair after a terrible fall that shattered his hip, shifted his weight and winced. Although many years had passed since his sudden accident, a stroke that sent him crashing down the stairs, the physical limitations remained a constant, bittersweet reminder of how his life had been forever changed. "Dad, would you like a blanket?" called Sophie from the kitchen as she hurriedly grabbed one from the closet before he could reply. At 19, Sophie was the only one of Samuel's children still living at home, taking on his daily care with a surprising amount of maturity. "I'm all right, honey," Samuel replied, his voice heavy with the weariness that had become part of him. "What time did Blake say he would arrive?" "Gavin," said Samuel's second oldest son, checking his phone at 25. "He mentioned that he'd be here around 6 o'clock. It shouldn't be long now." Gavin had inherited his father's strong build, broad shoulders, and even the small dimple on his chin, though his manner was much more balanced and measured. Working as an accountant downtown, he had paid his own way through school with scholarships and part-time jobs after their mother vanished. "Logan, could you please turn down the volume?" called out Rachel from the dining room as she set the table. At 23, Rachel had grown into a responsible young woman, managing a local bookstore with her shoulder-length hair neatly tied back in a ponytail while she moved quickly between the kitchen and dining area. 15-year-old Logan, lounging on the couch with the remote in hand, grumbled and reluctantly lowered the volume on the sports highlights he had been watching. "I'm just trying to find a good movie for later," he defended, scrolling through his streaming options. "How about that new sci-fi flick, the one with humans-looking aliens?" "No aliens," Samuel said with a slight smile. No, Sophie isn't fond of them." Just then, Sophie reappeared from the kitchen, carrying a pile of plates. "I don't mind aliens at all. I just can't stand when they burst out of people's chests during dessert." Their playful banter filled the house with a warm, familiar vibe. It was a signal of how they managed to move forward as a family, despite their past. Every weekend, all 5 siblings gathered for dinner, lively conversation and a movie, a ritual that held them close over the years of absence. Rachel stepped back to admire the table setup. 5 places neatly arranged with an extra setting at the head for Blake. Carefully aligned plates, chilled glasses of ice water, and napkins folded next to the cutlery, exactly as their mother had once taught her. "Something smells incredible," commented Gavin as he made his way into the dining room. "It's Lagna," Sophie replied proudly. "And don't forget, I made some garlic bread too." Logan gave up his search for a movie and joined them. At the table, his lanky figure sinking into his usual chair. "Can we start already? I'm starving," Samuel insisted as he wheeled himself to his seat, shaking his head. "We always wait for Blake. Once everyone is here, then we begin. But the food is getting cold," Logan complained, staring at the steaming dish in the center of the table. "I'll call him," Gavin offered, already dialing Blake's number. After a moment, he frowned. No answer, just his voicemail. They sat in a heavy silence as the minutes slipped away. The lasagna cooled, and the ice in their glasses began to melt. Samuel checked his watch repeatedly, worry etching deeper lines on his face. Just as Rachel was about to suggest they start eating without Blake, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway and a door slamming startled them. The front door burst open and Blake rushed in. His 30-year-old face, normally calm, was flushed with a mix of excitement and worry. His usually tidy appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie untucked and the top button undone, with dark hair falling messily over his forehead. He scanned the room and took in the sight of his family gathered around the table waiting for him. Sorry I'm late, he panted, though there was an unmistakable edge of urgency and tension in his tone that set everyone on high alert. It's okay. We were just getting ready to start, Samuel began, but Blake cut him off. I found something, he blurted out, pulling his chair closer yet staying on his feet. Something about Mom. Instantly, the mood in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Faces became tense, shoulders stiffened, and expressions hardened. I got a call from Detective Nelson today, Blake continued, fumbling with his phone. They discovered something I need to show you. Sit down, Blake, Samuel said, firmly. We've been waiting for you. The meal is cooling. Dad, you don't understand. This is important, Blake insisted, clutching his phone like it was a lifeline. Just give me a minute. Your father's right, interjected Gavin in a calm yet commanding tone. Let's eat first. Whatever it is can wait until after dinner. Blake glanced around the table, desperately searching for someone to back him up, but saw only hesitant expressions. Rachel was busy with her plate, Sophie kept biting her lip, and Logan stared at him with a mix of irritation and discomfort. We agreed on this, Rachel said softly. We decided not to talk about Mom, especially not during family time. But this is different, Blake insisted. The police found Mom's car. It was submerged in a river. Gavin's voice suddenly grew sharp. We already know what happened. She left us. She couldn't stand it anymore. Dad's accident, the medical bills, raising all of us by herself. She met someone else and just vanished. That's not true. Blake shot back. Mom would never... But she did, didn't she? Rachel added, her calm mask cracking slightly. Dad is stuck in a wheelchair. Our debts are through the roof from his medical bills, and then she disappears without a trace. What do you call that? 14 years, Blake, Gavin said, his tone softening. 14 years without a single word. No calls, no letters, nothing. What more proof do you need? Tempers flared, voices overlapped, and old resentments and heartache poured out. Logan shrank back in his chair, while Sophie looked helplessly between her arguing siblings. Enough! Samuel's booming voice cut through the clamor, immediately followed by a harsh cough that bent him double in his wheelchair. The argument ceased instantly. Sophie jumped up to pat her father's shoulder as he sipped some water, whispering, "I'm sorry, Dad," before turning to the others. "Please, can we stop this? Dad has been looking forward to tonight all week. He misses all of us. Let's try to have one calm dinner." A heavy silence fell over the table, punctuated only by Samuel's labored breathing as he recovered from his cough. "Fine," Blake finally said, settling into his chair with clenched teeth. "I need you to understand, this isn't just another dead-end clue. The police pulled Mom's car out of a river." The revelation caught everyone's attention. "What?" Samuel's voice was barely audible. "Detective Nelson called me this afternoon," Blake went on, seizing his moment. "They located her car in a river. That's why I was late. I was on the phone getting all the details." Samuel turned to Sophie. "Could you grab my phone from the side table, please?" Sophie quickly retrieved it and watched as her father scrolled through his messages with shaking hands. His face grew pale as he saw 4 missed calls from Detective Nelson. Looking up at Blake, he asked, "Did they recover her body?" Blake shook his head. "I'm not sure. The detective said they're still examining the scene. He mentioned that it would be best if we came down there." The family exchanged uncertain looks, the dinner all but forgotten as the shock of the new discovery sank in. "Maybe we should eat something first," suggested Sophie, her practical instincts taking over as she looked at her father with worry. "Dad needs his medication with food, and it'll only take a few minutes." Gavin nodded in agreement. "Sophie's right. Let's grab a quick bite and then head out." They ate in silence. What was once delicious lasagna now tasted bland, and forks clattered on plates as everyone rushed through the meal, their minds swirling with unspoken questions. Once they had eaten enough, Gavin and Logan began clearing the table while Rachel and Sophie helped Samuel get ready for the unexpected trip. Sophie gathered his medications and a warm blanket, while Rachel collected his wallet and phone. "Are you sure you want to go, Dad?" Sophie asked softly as she adjusted his sweater. "Maybe we could stay here while someone else checks it out." Samuel shook his head resolutely. "I need to be there." Outside, the night had grown darker and a cold chill filled the air, something that hadn't been there when they'd first sat down for dinner. Their old family SUV, modified to fit Samuel's wheelchair, waited silently in the driveway of their humble, single-story ranch home, surrounded by towering oak trees that had witnessed both the good times and the sorrow of the family for many decades. Blake and Gavin carefully helped their father from his wheelchair into the passenger seat, neatly folding and storing it in the back. Rachel, Sophie, and Logan squeezed into the middle row, while Blake took the driver's seat. "I'll drive," he assured, quickly adjusting the mirrors. "I know exactly where we're headed." As he pulled out of the driveway, Blake noticed the house glowing warmly from the outside, porch lights, windows alight, and a welcoming lawn. But little would any passerby suspect the internal turmoil, or the empty space left by a missing mother for 14 long years. The SUV rolled through the familiar streets of their small town, past the high school all the siblings once attended, and by the little grocery store where Mom had last been seen. Blake gripped the steering wheel tightly, determined to obey the speed limit despite the rush of adrenaline. "What exactly did Detective Nelson say?" Samuel broke the silence. Blake kept his eyes on the road. "Not much, just that they located Mom's car in a river while looking into another case," he explained, leaving out further details. "After all these years," mumbled Rachel from the back seat, "why now?" No one could answer her. Then Blake's phone buzzed with an incoming message. "That's from the detective," he said, glancing at it briefly. "He's sending the exact location. It's at Miller's Lake." "That's nearly 30 minutes away," noted Gavin. "Why would Mum's car be so far out there?" The question hung unspoken in the car. Miller's Lake was a secluded spot, exactly the kind of place someone might choose if they didn't want to be found. The rest of the drive was quiet and tense as every family member lost themselves in thought, leaving behind the familiar town. Streetlights grew rarer, and the road became narrower. Blake switched on the high beams as they turned onto an unpaved road winding through dense woods toward the lake. The SUV bounced over the rough terrain, forcing Blake to slow down considerably. After several minutes, the trees parted to reveal the dark, glistening surface of Miller's Lake, where flashing police lights danced along the shore. Blake parked as close as possible and turned to his father. "Are you ready?" Samuel nodded solemnly, his face set in determination. Gavin and Rachel helped him out of the car and into his wheelchair, while Sophie gently placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder as the car doors opened. The overpowering smell hit them immediately, stale water mixed with mud and an odd musty scent, hinting at long-buried secrets that had just been disturbed. Logan wrinkled his nose and hung back as his older siblings assisted their father toward the police line. The wet ground made maneuvering the wheelchair difficult, so Gavin and Rachel had to work together to get Samuel across the patchy, muddy ground where the wheels sometimes sank into soft puddles. Sophie stayed right beside her dad, her arm linked with his as they approached the cluster of police officers. Blake stepped ahead, scanning the gathered law enforcement for a familiar face, and soon spotted Detective Nelson near the water's edge, deep in conversation with another officer. The detective was a solid, stocky man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a perpetually tired look, clearly someone who had seen far too much in his career. "Detective Nelson," Blake called as he approached quickly. The detective turned, his weathered expression softening slightly with recognition. "Blake, I'm glad you made it. I see you brought everyone. We needed all of you here." "What did you find?" asked Blake, as the detective motioned toward the lake where a tow truck rested. Its heavy winch had already done its work. On the shore lay a car, or rather what was left of one, Even after so many years underwater, the faded blue sedan was unmistakably the one once driven by Veronica Reed. "We found it earlier this afternoon," explained Detective Nelson as the family gathered around. "We weren't actively looking for it. In fact, we were running a helicopter as part of a drug investigation when the pilot noticed something reflecting off the water." Samuel studied the waterlogged vehicle with an unreadable expression. "Did you find—" he began but couldn't finish. "No bodies," replied Detective Nelson, understanding the question that wasn't spoken aloud. "That's the strange part. The car was completely empty when we hauled it up." "Empty?" repeated Gavin in disbelief. "Are you positive?" "Absolutely empty," confirmed the detective. "But we did recover some interesting items from inside." "What kind of items?" Blake asked eagerly. Detective Nelson reached into his pocket and produced a sealed evidence bag containing a water-worn photograph. This came from the glove compartment, preserved inside a plastic bag. "It's a photo of your mother." With trembling hands, Samuel took the bag, staring at the faded image of Veronica Reed smiling carefreely before her disappearance. "There was one more thing," the detective continued cautiously. "We also found a few personal items, a pair of men's sunglasses, a baseball cap, and a receipt bearing a man's name." "I knew it," Rachel suddenly declared bitterly. "She left with someone else." "That can't be right," Blake protested immediately. "We still don't know enough. What else could it mean?" Gavin challenged. "Her car sunk to the bottom of a river, contained men's items, and yet there's no sign of Mom. It only points to the idea that she staged her own disappearance. Our investigation suggests the car was intentionally sunk," Detective Nelson added. "There's no damage that would indicate an accident. The windows were down, letting the water in to sink it. There's no evidence of a violent struggle. It's like she knew what she was doing was against the law," Rachel said, crossing her arms sharply as she abandoned any pretense of calm. "She couldn't have just walked away without leaving clues behind, so she made it look like something terrible happened." "That sounds ridiculous," Blake argued. "Mom would never just abandon us. There has to be another explanation." Quietly, Logan spoke up. "Why would she leave us when Dad needed her the most? When we all needed her?" "Sometimes people just crack under pressure," Gavin observed softly. "Between Dad's medical bills, raising all of us without help. She found an escape route and took it." Desperate, Blake turned to Detective Nelson. "You don't really think that's all there is to it, do you? After 14 years, there must be more to the story." The detective sighed heavily. "I've been in this job for 27 years, Blake. I've seen people vanish by choice before. They go to incredible lengths to cover their tracks. But why find the car now?" Samuel asked in a steady voice, despite the emotion in his eyes. "After all these years, we weren't even looking for it," Detective Nelson explained. "We were doing aerial surveillance on a drug operation when the helicopter spotted the car's reflection in the river. Sometimes you catch objects underwater when the sun hits just right. It appears to be a complete coincidence." He then produced another evidence bag containing a small water-damaged item. "This is what confirmed that the car belonged to your mother. Her driver's license and a family photograph were found in the center console." Samuel took this second bag, examining the worn but still recognizable family portrait of himself, Veronica Reed, and all 5 children, snapped just a few months before her vanishing and his accident. "So what's next?" Gavin pressed, his practical side coming through. Detective Nelson rubbed the back of his neck and said, "We're going to examine the car thoroughly to see if there's any more evidence. But honestly, this is an investigation from 14 years ago. We simply don't have the resources to launch a full-scale investigation unless we get clear signs of foul play." "That means you're going to say she just ran off and leave?" "It at that?" Blake demanded. "I never said that," the detective replied with calm patience. "But the evidence so far points to her leaving on purpose. I can provide you with copies of every piece of evidence we have if you'd like." Scanning the room, he added, "These are just our preliminary findings." "What's the point of all this?" Rachel asked, her voice hollow. "Nothing will ever change what happened." Samuel, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. "Sophie, I'd like to go home now. I'm exhausted." "Of course, Dad," Sophie said softly, as she moved behind his wheelchair. "Do what you need to with the car." Samuel told Detective Nelson, "We've lived with this mystery for 14 years. I'm not convinced that uncovering the truth now will bring us any solace." Just as the family began to disperse, Blake insisted, "I want copies of all." "The documents." Detective Nelson nodded, retrieving a manila envelope from his vehicle. "I prepared these just in case. There's also another envelope with copies of items from the glove compartment. My team photographed everything when we recovered the car." Handing the envelope to Blake, the detective placed a sympathetic hand on his shoulder. "I've worked on countless missing person cases. Often it's the eldest who finds it hardest to let go. I hope this helps you find some closure, son." Blake stared at the envelope in his hands and said, "Thank you." As he walked back to the car where the rest of the family waited, he felt the heavy burden of both the physical evidence and his own emotions. Even though everyone else believed that their mother had abandoned them, Blake could not accept that explanation. Deep down, he was sure there was more to the story, and that maybe the answers lay in these papers. Soon, the family piled back into the SUV, their earlier energy replaced by a quiet, oppressive silence. Gavin slid into the driver's seat, taking the keys from Blake without a word. "I'll drive," he said simply, starting the engine as the others settled in. Blake climbed into the back row, determined to pore over the envelope's contents. As the car rolled away from Miller's Lake, he activated his phone's flashlight and began examining the documents. The first pages were the standard police reports, detailed descriptions of the recovery operation, inventories of the items found in the car, and pictures showing the vehicle's damaged state after spending 14 long years underwater. Blake read each page carefully, searching for any detail that might contradict the idea that their mother had truly cared about them. But nothing changed his belief. Meanwhile, Gavin drove more aggressively than Blake would have liked, taking sharp turns and quick accelerations that made it hard for Blake to read the documents. "Could you please slow down a bit?" Blake called out, but Gavin either didn't hear him or deliberately ignored the request. After several more minutes of the car bouncing around, Blake reluctantly returned the papers to the envelope, deciding to wait until they got home. Better yet, until he was alone in his own place, where he could study everything properly without his siblings' judging eyes. The drive back to Samuel's house was marked by an uncomfortable silence, the steady hum of the engine punctuated by the occasional sigh from Samuel in the passenger seat. Finally, when they arrived and the porch light shone warmly, Logan was the first to break the tension. "Are we still going to watch a movie?" he asked cautiously, looking around at everyone. "We don't have to end the night like this, do we?" His question hung in the air until Rachel slowly nodded. "I think that would be best. We have dessert waiting and it would be a waste to let the evening go to waste." "Dad?" Sophie looked to her father for confirmation. Samuel offered a small smile. "Yes, I think we could all use a distraction." They helped Samuel back into his wheelchair and entered the house. Gavin and Rachel headed straight for the living room, turning on the television and browsing through channels, while Sophie went into the kitchen to warm up the apple pie she had baked earlier. Logan hovered between groups before joining his older siblings by the TV. Blake, however, stayed near the door, still clutching the envelope. "I'm not staying," he announced. The others turned toward him. "What do you mean?" asked Samuel. "I'm heading home," Blake replied. "I need time alone to go over these documents properly. There might be something really important. Here." "Blake," Gavin interjected with exasperation, "just let it go already. We finally got some answers, even if they're not what we wanted. At least now we know nothing for sure. All we have is a car in a river and a bunch of assumptions," Blake insisted. "Please, stay," Sophie said softly. "At least for the movie. We can talk about everything tomorrow once we've all had some time to think." Blake looked at his little sister, whose earnest eyes pleaded with him, then at his father, who looked more worn and tired than he had just hours before. For a moment, he almost reconsidered staying and watching the movie, even if he wouldn't truly enjoy it while his mind teemed with questions. "I'm sorry," he finally said, "but I really need to do this." Without waiting for another word, he stepped out of the house and made his way to the car. Through the front window, he could see the family gathered around the TV, the familiar spots they all occupied. Samuel at the end of the couch, Sophie on the armrest beside him, and the others spread out on the remaining furniture. Blake sat in his car for a long moment, keys in the ignition, but with the engine still off. "Where are you, Mom?" he whispered into the quiet interior. "What happened? Did you really leave us?" Frustrated by the tears threatening to fall, he wiped his eyes and muttered, "I was the oldest. After Dad's accident, I had to take charge. I got a job immediately instead of going to college, helped with the kids, and did everything possible to keep us together. And now they all resent me because I refused to believe you left us behind." Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Blake started the car and switched on the interior light. He reopened the envelope and spread the documents across the passenger seat. This time, he noticed a smaller envelope inside labeled "Miscellaneous." Curious, he opened it and found photocopies of personal items and documents that had been recovered from the car. One of these was a lease agreement. Although smudged by water, it was dated around 3 months after his mother's disappearance. The name on the lease wasn't Veronica Reed at all. It was a different name entirely, Madeline Ellis. What caught Blake's eye, however, was the signature at the bottom. Though faded and blurry, he immediately recognized his mother's signature, the same looping V she had used on school forms, and the familiar elegant R that appeared on every shopping list. "Madeline Ellis," he whispered in shock. Mom used an alias. His heart pounded as he scrutinized the document. An address was printed on the lease. Pulling out his phone, he quickly entered the address into a mapping app. The satellite view showed an industrial property on the outskirts of town, a warehouse, not an apartment or a house, nestled among other similar structures in an area dominated by factories. "This doesn't add up," he murmured. "Why would Mom rent a warehouse under a fake name?" Then his eyes caught another detail on the lease. The name Vincent Ross. Although vaguely familiar, it took him a second to recall. He searched his memory and even looked up a few old articles in his head. Multiple reports described a local businessman questioned for money laundering, who was later cleared of fraud charges, and his properties had long been linked to illegal loan operations. As Blake read through these recollections, he pieced together an image of a man who operated in the gray areas, someone deeply involved in predatory lending and other shady deals that the police could never fully pin down. He glanced back at the house where, through the window, he saw his family watching TV together. For a moment, he considered going back to show them his discovery, but he knew they'd already settled on their explanation for Mom's disappearance. No lease agreement or sketchy landlord would change their minds. "I'll handle this on my own," Blake decided, putting the car in reverse and slowly backing out of the driveway. He steered toward the address on the lease, determined to uncover the connection between his mother and Vincent Ross and why she would choose a warehouse instead of a regular home. The GPS guided him through roads that gradually worsened until he found himself in a rough industrial district. The streetlights were few and far between, and the buildings looked worn and neglected. Abandoned factories with broken windows, warehouses surrounded by chain-link fences topped with barbed wire, and an occasional all-night truck stop under harsh fluorescent lights on empty lots. After driving for 20 minutes, the GPS announced that he had reached his destination. Blake slowed the car and peered through the windshield at a weathered one-story building set back from the road. A faded sign hung askew over the entrance. Quality Furniture Refurbishing. He pulled into a gravel parking lot a short distance from the building. Although the place was barely operational, a dim light glowed from inside and an old pickup truck sat by a side door. The windows were darkened from within, concealing the interior. Blake turned off the engine but stayed in the car, contemplating his next move. He hadn't planned for this encounter. He hadn't considered what he'd do when he finally arrived. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and although he doubted anyone would be working so late, it was clear someone was inside. As he debated whether to approach or come back in the daylight, a figure emerged from a side door, an older man carrying a steaming cup in a plastic container. The man immediately noticed the car and began walking steadily toward it. Blake's first instinct was to drive away, but something told him this might be his only chance to learn about the place and its connection to his mother. He rolled down the window as the man came closer. The security guard, as it seemed he was, appeared older than Blake had assumed, maybe in his early 60s, but moved with the certainty and vigor of someone much younger. Despite the late hour and chill in the air, he wore a light jacket over a plain uniform shirt with no company logo. His face was rough and lined, yet his eyes remained alert. "Evening," the guard said in a friendly tone. "Are you lost? Not many people find themselves out here this late unless they've taken a wrong turn." Blake hesitated, weighing his options carefully. The truth was too risky to reveal that he was there investigating his long-missing mother's links to this building. Instead, he offered a simple excuse. "I might have missed a turn," he said with a forced, casual tone, "and as I was driving by, I noticed this place. I run a small business and have been looking for warehouse space nearby. I know it's late, but I saw a light on and thought I'd check it out." The guard sipped his coffee, studying Blake over the rim of his cup. "This property isn't for sale, if that's what you're wondering." "Who owns it?" Blake replied, trying to sound naturally curious. "Travis Ross," the guard stated. Blake's heart skipped a beat at the name. "Travis Ross. I'm not familiar with that name." The guard raised an eyebrow. "He's the son of Vincent Ross. Never heard of Vincent." Blake shook his head, feigning ignorance. "I'm not sure I should have, considering he owned half the industrial area around here." The guard explained, "Vincent passed away a few years back and his son Travis took over." "I see," Blake murmured, his thoughts racing. "Is there any way to contact Travis? Perhaps to discuss renting or buying part of the space?" The guard chuckled softly. "Travis is a very private man. He doesn't deal with folks directly, especially not those who just pop up after hours. Perhaps you could ask for someone else, a manager or representative, when you come by tomorrow." After a moment's pause, the guard continued, "Come back during the business hours and ask for Ronald. He's the one who handles Travis's affairs here." "Ronald?" Blake repeated, committing the name to memory. "He should be there tomorrow. I have his number, so I can let him know someone is interested." "That would be best," the guard replied, taking another sip of his coffee. "Ronald prefers to meet face-to-face, and he doesn't appreciate surprises or having outsiders tag along." "I understand," Blake said. "I'll come by on my own." Just as he was about to roll up the window, a thought flashed through his mind. If he left now, he'd only confirm that the Ross family still owned this place, and that wouldn't give him any solid proof. Taking a calculated risk, he called out to the guard, who had started to walk away. "One more thing, have you ever heard of anyone by the name of Madeline Ellis around here?" The guard's friendly look vanished instantly. His shoulders stiffened and his face turned stone cold. "You need to leave now," he said flatly, his warmth gone. Realizing he might have pushed too far, Blake pressed on. "I just need to—" "No." Before he could finish, the guard stepped quickly toward the car, closing the distance in just 2 long strides. He placed his worn hands on the edge of the open window and leaned in so close that Blake could see every line on his face. "Are you looking for trouble?" the guard said in a low, threatening voice. "You're in the right place if you are. Just know, she did not want to be found." A chill shot through Blake. "What do you mean?" he managed to ask, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Who didn't want to be found?" The guard straightened up, his knuckles resting against the doorframe. "If you want to talk about that, come see Ronald tomorrow, but I strongly advise you not to." With one more hard tap on the car frame, he added, "You'd better leave now." Blake hesitated only a moment before backing the car out slowly. He watched as the guard stood silently, his eyes locked on him until Blake finally turned and drove away. His mind raced as he navigated back toward town, processing the guard's reaction to the name Madeline Ellis, his mother's alias, and wondering what he meant by trouble, if not to confirm that she had chosen to disappear. None of it made sense, yet for the first time in 14 years, Blake felt he was on the trail of something real, something that might finally explain what happened to his mother. The dashboard clock read 11:35 at night as Blake drove back, his thoughts awhirl with questions and theories. The implications lent some support to what his siblings already believed, that their mother had chosen to vanish. Still, the guard's sudden change in attitude and threat implied there was a hidden side to her story. Blake knew he should share his findings with the rest of the family, but after what had happened at dinner and at the lake, he doubted they'd listen. They had all accepted their own version of what happened. Gavin had taken on the role of the responsible one, Rachel had closed herself off to further disappointment, Sophie poured her energy into caring for their father, and Logan, who was barely old enough to remember their mum, had never really known her. None of them wanted to dig up old wounds, except for Blake, who never accepted the idea that she simply walked away from them. Still, there was someone else who might be interested in what he'd discovered. Pulling over to the side of the road, Blake retrieved a business card belonging to Detective Nelson from his wallet. Though he hesitated, aware of how the detective might react to his independent investigation, Blake knew the information was too important to keep to himself and dialed the number. On the 4th ring, the detective answered groggily. "Nelson, here," he said. "It's Blake Turner. I'm sorry for calling so late, but I found something in those evidence copies you gave me." Blake carefully explained, "There was a lease agreement in that miscellaneous envelope. The address is for a warehouse rented under the name Madeline Ellis, but the signature is unmistakably my mother's." Detective Nelson confirmed. "It caught my eye too." "Why didn't you bring it up sooner?" Blake asked, a note of accusation in his voice. "Because it fits perfectly with what we suspected," the detective answered patiently. "People who vanish by choice often set up new identities. They rent space under fake names, start new lives. But it isn't an apartment or a house. It's a warehouse, and the landlord is none other than Vincent Ross. I did look him up. Vincent Ross was a notorious figure in certain circles. His business ventures operated in legal gray areas, predatory loans, aggressive debt collection, you name it. He faced investigations several times, but was never convicted." "So why would my mother rent from someone like that?" Blake pressed. "That's where I think everything connects," said Detective Nelson. "Based on our evidence, I believe your mother needed to disappear quickly and completely. Vincent Ross's operations even helped people vanish for a price. That warehouse might have been a transitional stop, a place to adopt a new identity before moving on." "Are you saying she went there to start over?" Blake asked incredulously. "It fits the timeline," explained Detective Nelson. The lease is dated 3 months after she vanished. That would have given her enough time to set things up, perhaps even with a new partner. A new partner? But there's no sign she was seeing anyone. The sunglasses we found in the car, for instance. Detective Nelson reminded him they were men's sunglasses with the name Rodney carved into one arm. Blake nearly dropped his phone. "Rodney?" he echoed, his pulse quickening. "Are you absolutely sure the name was Rodney?" "Positive," the detective confirmed. "So why does that name matter?" Blake's thoughts raced, remembering the guard at the warehouse had mentioned a contact named Rodney who handled Travis Ross's affairs and had urged him to return the next day. "Could this be the same Rodney whose sunglasses were found in Mom's car?" he asked. Detective Nelson's voice grew quiet. "Blake, I need you to listen carefully. These people are extremely dangerous. If they're linked to your mother's disappearance, they will do everything in their power to cover their tracks. I don't want you going back to that warehouse. Under any circumstances." Blake gripped the phone tightly. "So what am I supposed to do? Just wait around?" "Yes, exactly that," replied Detective Nelson firmly. "I appreciate you informing me, but now you must step back and let us handle it." "You said the guard told you to return tomorrow to meet Rodney?" Blake confirmed. "That might be our only chance to learn the truth about what happened to Mom." "Absolutely not," the detective said sternly. "You are not to return there. We will dispatch undercover officers and set up surveillance. There are strict protocols for this type of investigation." Blake knew the detective was right. Yet the thought of waiting, with the risk of losing the one lead he had after 14 years, was too painful. Still, he recognized the danger, not only to himself, but to the investigation, and finally agreed. "All right, I won't go back." "Thank you," Detective Nelson replied, relief evident in his tone. "I'm going to make some calls to get things moving. We'll keep you updated on any new developments, I promise." "One more thing," Blake added before the call ended. "You should know that my father and siblings are at risk too. If these people catch on that we're investigating, I'll arrange for extra patrols near both your place and Dad's house." The detective reassured him. "Make sure you all stay safe and avoid that warehouse at all costs." After hanging up, Blake sat in his car for several long minutes, weighing his options. The detective's warnings were reasonable and the risks real. Yet 14 years of unanswered questions and the stubborn belief that Mom had not truly abandoned them pushed him to take one last step toward the truth. Eventually, he drove his car into his apartment's parking lot, knowing that sleep would evade him as he mulled over his next move. One thing was now clear. He was closer than ever to discovering the truth about his mother's disappearance. Morning arrived with a clarity that had eluded Blake during his restless night. Tossing and turning for hours, he finally dozed off around 4 o'clock in the morning, only to be jolted awake by a phone call at 7:30. The caller ID showed Detective Nelson's number. "I'm on my way to pick you up," the detective said without further ado when Blake answered. "We're heading to that warehouse, but on my terms. Be ready in 15 minutes. True to his word, Detective Nelson arrived exactly in 15 minutes outside Blake's apartment building, driving an unmarked police car. He was dressed in plain clothes, a faded button-down with jeans and a worn leather jacket that made him look more like a tradesman than a detective. Blake climbed into the passenger seat and immediately noticed that the detective wasn't alone. In the back, another man, also in plain clothes, sat there. The detective introduced him simply as Officer Davis, whose presence was meant to provide tactical support. "I've been up all night coordinating," Detective Nelson explained as they pulled away. "Based on what you told me about Vincent, Ross and his son Travis, we're treating this as a potentially high-risk situation. I have plain clothes, officers positioned around the warehouse, and a tactical team waiting just a few blocks away. Should we switch to my car?" Blake suggested. "The guard saw it last night, and it might not raise as much suspicion." Detective Nelson considered this for a moment, then agreed. "You're right, we'll change vehicles at the next parking lot." 10 minutes later, they had transferred into Blake's car with him behind the wheel and Detective Nelson sitting beside him. Officer Davis stayed with the unmarked car, which would now serve as part of our surveillance perimeter. "Remember, you must stay in the car unless I tell you otherwise," Detective Nelson instructed as they approached the industrial area where the warehouse was located. "I'm including you because you already have contact there, and your presence makes us less conspicuous. Just remember, this is a law enforcement operation, not a family search." Blake nodded, his mouth dry with a mix of nervousness and anticipation as they turned onto a street leading directly to the warehouse. He noticed the same pickup truck parked outside that had been there the previous night, but tonight the area felt even quieter and eerily still. "Something doesn't seem right," Detective Nelson muttered, his experienced eyes scanning the building. "There's no movement, no other vehicles, only that truck." Blake parked in a gravel lot at roughly the same spot as before. They sat silently for a moment watching the building. The windows were still covered, and tonight there wasn't a single light visible inside. "Stay here," Detective Nelson said, his hand sliding over the concealed weapon under his jacket. "I'm going to take a quick look around. If I signal you to leave, drive off immediately and meet Officer Davis at the rendezvous point." Blake observed nervously as the detective cautiously approached the building with the calm precision of someone well-trained for dangerous situations. First, Detective Nelson checked the pickup truck by peering through its windows, then moved toward a side entrance where Blake had spotted the guard the previous night. After testing the door and finding it unlocked, the detective disappeared into the building. Minutes ticked by, first 5, then 10, while Blake's anxiety grew, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Finally, Detective Nelson reappeared at the entrance, motioning for Blake to come over. "It's completely empty," the detective announced. "They must have left in a hurry after your visit last night." Blake followed the detective into the warehouse. The smell of dust and abandonment overwhelmed him as he stepped into a cavernous space that had clearly been cleared out recently. Bare, dust-covered floors with smooth, cleared patches where furniture once stood, empty brackets on the walls, and loose cables dangling from the ceiling. "They were running more than just storage operations here," observed Detective Nelson, pointing to a partitioned area that had been divided into separate rooms filled with makeshift workspaces. "Look at these improvised living areas and workstations. It's far more than just storage." Blake moved slowly through the space, trying to imagine his mother working or hiding here. Had she been forced to stay against her will, or had she sought refuge here voluntarily? "Over here," called Detective Nelson from across the large room. He was crouched near an overturned desk, examining something on the floor. Blake joined him and saw that the detective was holding a photograph that had slipped under the desk during the rushed evacuation. The photo showed a cargo ship docked at an industrial port, the ship's name Eastern Horizon clearly visible on its hull. "Turn it over," said Detective Nelson, handing it to Blake. On the back was handwritten information: the ship's name, a departure schedule for the following week, and a partial list of names that included Veronica R. and Rodney. They're planning to transport people on this vessel," said Detective Nelson as he pulled out his phone. "Based on this list, it's possible your mother is one of them." He immediately radioed for a search at the harbor and provided the name of the cargo ship. "This now takes top priority. We need to locate Eastern Horizon and stop its departure. Alert Harbor Patrol and the Coast Guard." Then, turning to Blake, he stressed, "We have to move quickly. If Rodney and his team set things in motion last night, they might have sped up their schedule." As they hurried back to the car, Detective Nelson made another call, this time instructing officers to check on Samuel and the rest of the family, since the investigation might put them at risk. After your visit, they might realize someone's asking questions. We must ensure your family's safety, he said. Blake felt his heart tighten with worry for his siblings and father. I didn't think of that, he admitted. I was so focused on finding Mom. Please call them. Detective Nelson instructed him. Call. Your father first, then everyone else. Tell them to stay put and that we'll send officers to secure the area. As they drove toward the harbor, Blake made those calls one by one, first to Samuel, then to each sibling, relaying the warning. Samuel was shocked and angry. Gavin and Rachel were skeptical, and Logan was confused, but eventually they all agreed to follow the instructions. As they neared the harbor, Blake reported to Detective Nelson, I'm not sure they all believe there's any danger. Better safe than sorry, the detective replied grimly. If Rodney and the Ross operation turn out to be as dangerous as I suspect, they won't hesitate to use your family as leverage when they're cornered. The harbor soon came into view, a sprawling industrial port filled with numerous piers. Stretching out over a vast bay, cargo ships of all sizes lined up at the docks, and smaller boats threading their way between them. Approaching the main security gate, Detective Nelson flashed his badge to a guard, who quickly directed them to the harbor master's office. Inside, the atmosphere was frantic, with officers coordinating with harbor officials to locate Easton. Horizon, what's the status? Detective Nelson asked a uniformed officer leading the operation. With a grim expression, the officer replied, Eastern Horizon left port last night, nearly 12 hours ahead of its filed departure time. The authorities allowed the early departure because of supposed weather concerns, though the reports indicate nothing significant in the weather. They knew we were onto them, Blake said, feeling the crushing weight of the revelation. Detective Nelson placed a steady hand on Blake's shoulder. We're not giving up yet. Harbor patrol boats are already chasing the ship and the Coast Guard has been notified. It can't have gone very far in 12 hours. What about here? Blake asked, gesturing to the docks. Couldn't some of Rodney's team still be around? We're one step ahead, the officer replied. We've arrested several dock workers involved in the ship's early departure, and they are being questioned as we speak. Detective Nelson nodded in approval. Good work. Now let's head back to the station. I want to personally join the interrogations. The drive to the police station was tense, with Detective Nelson constantly on the phone updating the expanding investigation. Every few minutes, he received news about the search for Eastern Horizon or additional measures to protect the Turner family. We've got eyes on the ship, he reported at one point. A Coast Guard aircraft has spotted it roughly 100 meters offshore, heading south. They're sending vessels to intercept. Blake gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind racing with possibilities. Could his mother really be on that ship after all these years? Was he finally close to finding her? When they arrived at the station, the building buzzed with activity. Officers moved purposefully between departments. Telephones rang almost continuously, and an atmosphere of urgency reigned. To Blake's surprise, his entire family was gathered in the waiting area, Samuel looking bewildered and exhausted in his wheelchair, Sophie standing protectively behind him, Gavin and Rachel sitting side by side, their faces a blend of concern and disbelief, and Logan fidgeting anxiously in his seat. "What are you all doing here?" Blake asked as he approached. "I thought you were staying at home," Samuel replied. "The police brought us in as a precaution. They said it would be safer to keep us all in one place." "Safer from what exactly?" demanded Rachel, arms folded defensively. Before Blake could answer, Detective Nelson stepped forward. "Your brother here may have discovered something crucial about your mother's disappearance," he announced in a calm, professional tone, "and that truth could end up putting all of you in danger." He quickly briefed the family on the details From the warehouse and the cargo ship photo to the list of names and the possibility that Veronica Reed was forced to work for Rodney and the Ross operation. "So you're saying Mom didn't leave us by choice?" Sophie asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Based on the evidence we have, it appears that your mother might have been coerced into working for a criminal organization run by Vincent Ross and his son Travis," Detective Nelson explained. "We believe she was forced because of an overwhelming debt or some other form of pressure." "That doesn't add up at all," Gavin objected. "Mom never had any major debts. Dad took care of the bills back then." Samuel, who had remained quiet until that point, cleared his throat softly. "Actually, it isn't entirely that simple," he admitted, and every eye in the room turned toward him in surprise. "After my accident, the medical bills were enormous. Our insurance didn't cover everything, and Veronica was desperate. She tried taking out bank loans, but our credit was maxed out. I was in the hospital, then in rehab, and I never really knew what she was doing to keep us afloat. I should have asked more questions." Blake knelt beside his father, softly asking, "Are you saying Mom might have borrowed money from someone like Vincent Ross?" Samuel slowly nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "She once mentioned, just once, that she had found a way to handle the bills. She reassured me not to worry, that everything was taken care of. I was too caught up in my own pain to ask." Detective Nelson pulled up a chair and sat across from Samuel. "Mr. Brooks, I need to ask, did your wife ever mention any names? Vincent Ross, perhaps Ronald? Any connection to a loan?" Samuel shook his head. "Not any specific names, but she did say something unusual about a week before she disappeared. She claimed that everything she did was for us, and I thought it was just stress speaking. I never imagined—" His voice broke and Sophie comforted him with a gentle touch. "The men we arrested at the harbor are being questioned right now," Detective Nelson announced to the whole family. "We hope they can provide more details about Eastern Horizon and whether your mother might be aboard it." "I want to talk to them," Blake said firmly. Detective Nelson hesitated before replying, "That isn't our standard procedure, Blake. Please understand, I'll do the questioning." He then led Blake down a corridor to a room with a one-way mirror, allowing them to listen in on the interrogations. In the first room, a middle-aged dock worker sat handcuffed at a table, being grilled by a couple of officers. "That isn't the guard I met," Blake observed, studying the man's stiff demeanor. They watched for several minutes as the suspect offered nothing more than his name and job at the harbor. Detective Nelson jotted down notes about the man's body language and responses before suggesting, "Let's try someone else." In the next interrogation room, they found an older man whose face immediately made Blake tense. "That's him," Blake said urgently. "That's the security guard from the warehouse." Detective Nelson peered through the glass. "Are you positive?" Blake confirmed. "He's the one who told me about Ronald." The detective nodded slowly. "Let's listen in a little longer." Unlike the dock worker, the guard spoke in a cool, almost detached tone. When asked about his employment, he admitted openly that he worked security for Travis Ross. When questioned about Eastern Horizon, he claimed ignorance regarding its cargo or destination. "He's lying," Blake muttered under his breath. "He seemed to know something about my mother, almost admitting she had been there." Detective Nelson watched the interrogation for several more minutes before deciding, "I'm going in. Stay here and observe." Blake watched as the detective entered the room, introducing himself to the officers and taking a seat directly across from the guard. Detective Nelson's tone was different now, less aggressive, more conversational. "We've been monitoring that warehouse for a while now," he said casually, though Blake knew it was partly a strategic bluff. "We've identified most of the people kept there, including Veronica Reed." The guard's face showed no change, though there was a subtle tension in his posture. "We know she was forced to work for Ross, probably because of a loan she couldn't pay off," continued Detective Nelson. What we don't know is whether she's still alive and if she's on board that ship." The guard replied evenly, "I don't know what you're talking about." Detective Nelson leaned forward, his voice taking a sterner tone. "Because you seem to remember exactly who she was. When her son mentioned her last night, I saw a flash of recognition cross your face, quickly hidden, I'm sure." He paused before adding, "By the way, your son is here. Believe me, he's determined to find out what really happened after 14 long years." The guard fell silent, his eyes briefly darting to the mirror behind him. "Here's the bottom line," Detective Nelson pressed. "We're going to catch that ship. The Coast Guard is already chasing it, and when we intercept, everyone aboard will have to start talking. If not, they'll save themselves by turning on each other. Rodney and Travis Ross will do whatever it takes to cover their tracks." The guard's calm finally cracked. He shifted in his seat, his eyes dropping to the table. "You're in serious trouble," Detective Nelson continued. "Kidnapping, unlawful detention, perhaps even trafficking. But if you cooperate, if you tell us where that ship is headed and confirm whether Veronica Reed is on board, I can." "Recommend leniency to the prosecutor." For a long, heavy moment, the guard said nothing. Then he sighed deeply, as if weighing his final decision. "I'm old and not long for this world. Prison is just another place to waste away. So why not do something right before I go?" Detective Nelson leaned in. "Help a family bring their mother home." The guard considered it and then whispered, "I can't tell you exactly where the ship is going. I honestly don't have that information. It's all compartmentalized. But I can give you access to something that might help." "What is that?" "Blake. Astor, there's an encrypted messaging app we use," the guard explained. "My login still works, and it has a GPS tracker for the ship, plus security camera feeds from on board. That's how Rodney keeps an eye on everything." Detective Nelson's eyes lit up. "You're willing to share that?" The guard nodded, slowly. "I'm dying anyway. Might as well do one good deed." Detective Nelson slid a small notepad over. "Write down every bit of login info, everything we need." As the guard scribbled, Blake felt a spark of hope he hadn't felt in 14 years. Finally, concrete evidence emerged, proving that their mother hadn't simply walked away. She might still be alive. Detective Nelson collected the guard's notes and said, "Let's get this to the tech team immediately. If this app works as described, we might track the ship's location and even see who's on board." They hurried to a nearby room filled with computer terminals, where a specialist immediately began working on creating a mirror session of the app without tripping any alerts. After a few tense minutes, Blake and Detective Nelson returned to the waiting area where the rest of the Turner family stood, their faces etched with anxiety, a mix of hope, fear, and disbelief after so many years of giving up. "Did you get anything?" asked Gavin as they entered. "Possibly," Detective Nelson replied cautiously. "The guard provided access to an app that might help us locate the ship and see exactly who's on board. Our tech team is working on it right now." "And do you really think Mom might still be alive?" asked Logan, his face a blend of confusion and desperate hope. "That she didn't just leave us on purpose?" "It sure looks that way," Blake said softly. "Dad told us about how overwhelmed she was with the bills. It makes sense. She might have borrowed money from Ross, couldn't pay it back, and they forced her to work for them." For 14 years, though, Rachel had clung to her skepticism, but now even she looked uncertain. "These criminal groups operate by isolating people," Detective Nelson explained gently. "They deliberately keep families apart. If Veronica believed contacting you would put you all in danger, she might have stayed away to protect you." Samuel reached out and squeezed Blake's hand, tears gathering in his eyes. "I should have known," he whispered. "All these years I thought she abandoned us because I wasn't enough to hold our family together." "None of us knew for sure, Dad," Blake reassured him. But we're going to find her now. We're going to bring her home. Just then, Detective Nelson's phone rang, interrupting the tender moment. He answered quickly, and after a few moments said, "We need to head over right away." Turning to the family, he announced, "The tech team has cracked into the app. Everybody, come with me to the computer lab immediately." The family moved as one down a long corridor. Samuel was carefully wheeled by Gavin, while Sophie and Rachel walked alongside him, and Logan stayed close to Blake, glancing up at him with newfound respect. In the spacious computer lab filled with monitors, servers, and technical equipment, the specialist beckoned them to a central workstation, where a large screen showed a map with a blinking dot moving slowly over a vast expanse of blue. "That dot is Eastern Horizon," the specialist explained, pointing it out. "According to the GPS, it's about 120 miles offshore and heading south-southeast. We've already passed these coordinates onto the Coast Guard. Can you pull up the onboard security feeds?" Detective Nelson asked. The specialist nodded and quickly typed commands. "The app only accesses security cameras from work areas, not private quarters. I'm cycling through the feeds right now." Soon, the main screen split into several smaller ones, each displaying different parts of the ship: cargo holds, narrow corridors, and mechanical backrooms. A few feeds showed what looked like improvised offices where several women worked at computers. "Hold on," Blake said suddenly, indicating one of the screens. "Can you enlarge that one?" The specialist zoomed in and the image filled. The screen, there in a room full of workers, a woman sat at a computer. Though time had taken its toll, her hair was streaked with grey and her face had thinned, but there was no mistaking it. It was their mother. "Mom," Sophie whispered. With tears streaming down her face, Samuel reached out with a trembling hand, as if trying to bridge the gap between them and the image on the screen. "Veronica," he murmured, his voice broken. Detective Nelson immediately grabbed his phone and relayed the visual confirmation. "To the Coast Guard teams, in pursuit of the ship. We have clear visual evidence. At least one missing victim is on board," he announced. "That is, Veronica Reed has been sighted after being missing for 14 years. Proceed with extreme caution." Turning to the family, he explained, "The Coast Guard will intercept the vessel, secure the ship, and ensure all on board are safely brought off. We must maintain radio silence so as not to alert anyone on board who might be listening." "What do we do now?" asked Gavin, his earlier doubts completely washed away by the undeniable proof that their mother was alive. "We wait," Detective Nelson said simply, "and get ready for her return." Samuel sat quietly in his wheelchair, tears occasionally streaming down his face as he gazed at his wife's image. Sophie and Rachel huddled together in silent support, while Gavin paced the room and Logan alternated between sitting by his father and standing near Blake, who refused to tear his eyes away from the screen. "I always knew she wouldn't have left us willingly," Blake said quietly to Detective Nelson when they briefly stepped apart from the others. "You never stopped believing in her," the detective observed kindly, "and that kind of faith is rare. She never gave up on any of you." "Blake," he corrected softly, "whatever happened to her, whatever they did, she survived 14 long years. She held on quietly, and now we have the evidence of her continuing existence." In that moment, Blake realized something profound about the power of family bonds. Faith wasn't about accepting something without proof. It was about holding on to the truth, even when everything around you said otherwise. For 14 years, each of them had built up their own defenses against the pain of abandonment, but deep inside, their connection remained, waiting to be healed. Now, standing at the brink of a long-awaited reunion, Blake understood that true courage wasn't only about facing external dangers. It was about confronting the fear of hope itself, of daring to believe that shattered things could be made whole again. Their mother had endured hardship to protect them, And now they would face whatever challenges lay ahead on that cargo ship, together no longer as broken pieces but as a family bound by love that no amount of time or distance could sever.